I was interested, Barry, if I know you the first name, that twice you referred to keeping the lights on. My interpretation of that is keeping our plasma screen TVs on. In other words, what I'm saying is that there seems to be an assumption that the good consumers there, the good electorate of Great Britain, are a given. What they are being provided with now is what yourselves and the Conservative Party, the coalition, are seeking to meet, as it were, with no contribution from the good burghers of the people.
Yeah. Look, let me say, I think the important point that you're making here is that there needs to be behavioural change and there needs to be regulatory change, because, and let me put it in this way, if I may. I don't know if you're familiar with the McKinsey cost curve, but effectively, let me see if I can do some magic of my own here.
You want to do some magic with this? No, you can't use that.
I can't use that. Sorry, I'm giving away his magic tricks. Anyway, let me simply describe it. What you have is you have your normal graph, okay, so your x and y axis, and what happens is on the McKinsey cost curve, you start here, and the bar charts come down like that, down like that, down like that, but they go like this, and then like that. So it's a sort of S on its side. I think that's an S on its side. And what this part, this element of the curve is it's the cost saving. It's all the things that we can do that will save maximum cost, getting to minimum cost saving when you get to the axis, and then going above that, the things that you can do that are going to have some cost attached to it, but you're still achieving the emissions savings. Okay? And critically, it is the element that is the cost saving. It's the change in behaviour. It's the making sure that things are switched off and not put on standby, or better still, government regulating so that the new standards for that equipment are that you can't put it onto standby, it has to go off. It's by those sort of cost-saving measures, by insulation, by all of these things that you're actually going to achieve a saving in the emissions that we have and the energy that we consume. But what I do want to say is this. Please don't imagine that all that needs to happen is for everybody to suddenly say, ah, great, I get it, therefore I'm now not going to watch TV, or I'm now not going to do this, and I'm not going to play with my Xbox or my PS3 or my whatever it is. That isn't going to happen. We have to be realistic about what is going on with the way in which the world is driven, and electricity consumption is not going to fall off, even if you get changes in behaviour, because if you look at a house that was built in the 1970s versus one that's built today, you'll find that the key difference between them is not the insulation, the cavity wall and things like that. It's this. Go into the kitchen and you might have 2 sockets in the 1970s house. Go into the kitchen in a house built today and you'll have 6, 8. Because people use electronic appliances in a way that was just unthought of 40, 50 years ago. And that isn't going to change. And many of the technologies that we are going to depend on for the sort of technological change that we need are going to be energy technologies. They're going to demand electricity. What we've got to ensure is that that electricity is not carbon generated. We've got to make sure it comes from the sun, we've got to make sure it comes from the wind, and we've got to make sure that it comes from wave power and tidal power. That's the way to go. It's not to say, you know what, we've all got to wear hair shirts, we've all got to not expect increased standards of living. What we've got to do is we've got to say, you've got to make those changes in your life that are going to save emissions, right? But actually, it's not a choice between living well and having a future for our children and grandchildren. It has to be both. It has to be both. Because that's the way that you persuade people and take people with you. You have to show them that there is a better future, but that future is a green future, and that future can give them the quality of life, the jobs and the employment that they want.
Yeah, sorry. There's a few questions I think you can deal with very quickly. Can climate change be explained by solar variations, sunspots? Do you want to speak about that, or should we?
No, if somebody's asked that question, I think it's important to try and answer.
Put a name, but yeah.
No, look, there has always been, for thousands of years, climate variation, and that's absolutely got to be accepted. It's part of the science. It doesn't conflict with the science. But what you have to do is you have to see that the variation that has taken place in the past 150 to 200 years has been at a level that has been unprecedented, and that it has gone in strict corresponding relationship to the increase in carbon emissions. Climate change must not become an ideology. It must always be based in science, but that means you have to conduct a proper scientific assessment of the balance of risks. And just as, 400 years ago, Pascal famously, when considering whether there was a God or not, said to himself, well, in Pascal's wager, a famous philosophical theory, he said, well, look, I can either do as I please and, live life to the max and eat, drink and be merry, and I'll have a good life. But the balance of risk is this. If I do that, it condemns me, perhaps, if I'm wrong, to an eternity of damnation in hell. Now, what we've got here is a similar Pascal's wager. You can either say, well, we make the changes that we need, we go through the process of changing the way our society is governed, and that's got its own stresses and pains and costs. But the cost of not doing it, if we're wrong about climate change, and climate change is real, the cost is that you lose the planet, or at least you lose human life on the planet. You don't lose the planet, but the planet loses us, because the ecosystems that are sustaining human life on this planet will go, because they cannot cope with the rate of change that climate change is inducing.
Yeah, a few other things. Really an idea to put to you from Phil Fletcher. Would it not be an idea, as transport is getting so much worse in London, that anybody who wishes to have a driving licence should also take the cycling proficiency test, regardless of whether they did one years ago or not? So the idea that if you're going to drive a car, you should at least know what it's like to be on a bicycle.
Spoken like a true cyclist. Look, I think there are important ways in which we need to improve modal shift. And that modal shift has to be from car not only to cycle, and the best way to do that is by designated cycle lanes. We've had some horrific accidents over the past 2 years in London, with people being crushed against railings and the death toll of cyclists. But we need a wholesale modal shift. I put a question to the Minister the other day, looking at the Greener Journeys modal shift, that they're looking to achieve a change of 1 billion journeys. And to do that would actually reduce by 50% the emissions from transport in this country. But that's the sort of thing that we need if we're really going to address climate change. Cycling safety, I think, is probably better addressed through other measures.
Okay, that wasn't my question, by the way.
No, sure.
Transport, again. We would like to be greener, but congestion makes public transport very slow. What can we do about this? So, I'm not quite sure the assumption there is...
Well, that's a bus public transport, obviously.
Right.
They're talking about bus rather than train or metro.
Yeah.
Look, the improvements to the public transport system, and I'm pleased to say that the other day I got an undertaking from Transport for London that by the end of June the Jubilee line weekend closures would be finished. So that's one good reason to encourage more people back onto public transport. But in terms of coach and bus, it's clear that the introductions of bus lanes do make a difference. They need to be preserved and protected. There need to be continuing stiff penalties for people who breach them. But that's the best way to avoid the congestion. It's by having those designated lanes.
So would you want the congestion charge zone to be back out where it was when Ken was trying to...
I've tried not to be party political in the things that I've said. I've tried to give credit to the government for advancing the fourth carbon budget as they've done. But it was one of the worst things that the Tories did when Boris took control of London, yes.
Right, okay. So on development, would it be more environmental, not international development, would it be more environmentally sensible, I've got a question here, to spread development out of London, which is already overcrowded? What's your feeling on that? I suppose that question of the green zones and so on.
Yes. Look, what any government wants to see and needs to see is sustainable development happening in all parts of the country. What we want is to make sure that there are jobs available for people everywhere within the UK, but equally one has to recognise that London in particular is a magnet, and companies want to invest both close to London and in London because of the benefits that London offers. And as a London MP, that's something I have to say I'm pleased about, because it does mean that we get jobs and economic benefit from that here. But clearly we need to see sustainable development, and that means showing that it can happen and does happen in every part of the country.
Right, thanks. I think we're really over the end of our time, and Barry has very kindly, spoken for all this time. I think there are a couple more questions, but I think we should really wind it up there, because I think...
Well, look, I'm happy to talk one-on-one with anybody who's still got a question.
So if people have got questions, I think Barry's going to be here for a little while. If you've got a question that you'd like to ask him, please go ahead and do that. And can I have a round of applause for Barry Gardiner for agreeing to come and speak? Now, on my programme, it says that 10 minutes